Hi, everybody. Is love strong enough to bring back lost memories? This question lingers in the quiet moments as Lytudiep chooses to stay by CEO Toan's side, even when he can no longer remember the love they once shared. Each day, she watches him struggle with fragments of a past that feels just out of reach, while her own heart carries every memory for the both of them. Lytudiep's decision is not driven by hope alone, but by devotion, silent, patient, and unwavering. She believes that if love was once real, it cannot simply disappear. Perhaps it waits, hidden deep within the heart, ready to awaken. Because sometimes memories don't return through the mind, they return through love. Love does not always return the way we expect it to. Sometimes it comes back quietly, wearing the face of a stranger. Tu Diem never imagined that the man she loved would one day look at her as if she had never existed. The road where they met again was no different from any other rural path. Dusty, narrow, lined with trees that had witnessed countless ordinary days. Yet for her, that moment changed everything. She recognized him instantly. CEO Toan, once confident, composed, and admired, now stood there with a worn bag on his shoulder, his clothes simple, his posture guarded. When she called his name, her voice trembling with hope, he turned slowly. His eyes searched her face, not for recognition, but for danger. "Do I know you?" he asked, his voice cautious, distant. That single sentence felt heavier than silence. Tu Diem smiled through the pain, stepping closer, believing, naively, that love alone could bridge the gap between who he was and who he had become. She reached out, wanting to hold him, wanting to remind him of everything they had shared. But he flinched. Fear rushed into his eyes, raw and uncontrollable. He pulled away, backing up as if she were about to hurt him, not heal him. And then, without another word, he turned and ran. Tu Diem stood frozen, her heart pounding, the dust settling slowly where he had disappeared. In that moment, the past collapsed into a single, painful truth. Toan no longer remembered her. Perhaps he no longer remembered himself. Questions filled her mind, echoing louder with every passing second. Had he been hurt? Had something broken inside him so deeply that his memories were lost? The way he avoided her touch, the way he clutched his head, it was the fear of someone whose world had been erased. Around her, life went on as usual. Workers walked by, voices drifted in the distance, someone laughed, someone complained about the heat. Everyday life, unchanged and unaware. Yet Tu Diem felt as though she had stepped into a different reality. If love was once built on shared memories, what remained when those memories were gone? And if he no longer knew her, did she still have the right to stay? As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the road, Tu Diem made a quiet decision, one that would change both their lives. If his memories could not find their way back to him, then she would stay and let love begin again. Morning arrived softly, like it always did in the countryside, without asking whether anyone was ready to face the day. The air was cool, the light pale, and life continued in its familiar rhythm. Yet for Lytudiep, nothing felt familiar anymore. After that encounter on the road, she stopped asking herself why Toan had forgotten her. The question brought only pain. Instead, she began asking something else. What should I do now? And the answer came quietly, without drama or grand promises. She would stay. Tu Diem didn't rush back to him. She didn't call his name again or chase after him. She understood now that love, when faced with fear, had to learn how to be gentle. So she stayed nearby, close enough to see him, far enough not to frighten him. From a distance, she watched Toan live his new life. Each morning, he joined other workers, lifting heavy sacks, climbing trees, wiping sweat from his face under the harsh sun. The man who once led meetings and signed contracts now worked with his hands, silently, obediently, as if hard labor were the only language he still understood. People around him whispered. He didn't look like a laborer, they said, too calm, too refined. Yet he never complained, never rested when others did. When asked his name, he paused, confused, then shook his head with an awkward smile. "I don't remember," he said. Those words pierced Tu Diem's heart every time. In the small details of daily life, she found herself loving him all over again. The way he drank water slowly, as if afraid it might disappear. The way he folded his worn jacket carefully at the end of the day. The way he stared at the sky in silence, as though waiting for something he couldn't name. Sometimes their paths crossed. He would glance at her, hesitant, curious, but not afraid anymore. She responded with a quiet smile. Nothing more. No explanations, no memories forced upon him. At night, Tu Diem returned home exhausted, her body aching, her heart heavier still. She wondered if staying meant delaying her own healing. Yet every morning she found herself walking the same path again. Because in ordinary life, between work, meals, and silent evenings, love doesn't always demand to be remembered. Sometimes it only asks for the courage to stay. It began with silence, not the heavy kind that hurts, but the quiet that slowly learns how to breathe. Tu Diem no longer waited from afar. Little by little, she stepped into Toan's everyday world, not as the woman from his forgotten past, but as someone ordinary, someone safe. She helped where she could, shared simple meals, walked beside him when the road allowed. She never mentioned memories, never spoke of who he used to be. And strangely, that was when something began to change. Toan didn't know her name at first, yet he trusted her presence. He waited for her at the edge of the field without knowing why. He listened when she spoke, even if her words were about the simplest things: weather, work, the taste of rice at lunch. In a life stripped of history, these small moments became anchors. In the rhythm of everyday living, love took on a different shape. There were no promises, no confessions, no grand gestures, only habits, only consistency. She handed him water when he was tired. He saved the last piece of food for her without thinking. She noticed how he avoided loud noises. He noticed when she was unusually quiet. Sometimes a flicker crossed his face, a pause too long, a breath held too tightly. When he passed a familiar tree or heard a melody drifting from a nearby radio, his eyes clouded, as if something inside him stirred but refused to surface. "Have we met before?" he asked her once, softly, almost afraid of the answer. Tu Diem smiled, her heart trembling. "Maybe," she said, "but does it matter?" He thought about it for a long time. Then he shook his head. "No, I just feel calm when you're here." That sentence stayed with her long after the day ended. At night, Tu Diem lay awake, torn between hope and restraint. She wondered if love alone could awaken memories, or if revealing the truth too soon would break the fragile trust they had built. Loving him like this, without being known, was both painful and pure. In the most ordinary moments, something extraordinary was happening. Toan was learning her again, not through memory, but through feeling. And perhaps, she realized, The heart remembers in ways the mind cannot explain. Love, it seemed, was quietly rewriting their story, one unspoken moment at a time. Some mornings arrive carrying more than light. They bring echoes. It happened on a day that looked no different from any other. The sky was pale, the air cool, and the village moved at its usual pace. People sweeping their yards, children laughing on their way to school, the scent of breakfast drifting through open windows. Life, in all its quiet familiarity, continued as it always had. Tu Diem and Toan walked side by side along the narrow path. Neither spoke. They had grown used to this comfortable silence, where words were unnecessary and presence was enough. Yet that morning, Toan suddenly stopped. His gaze fixed on a small wooden gate leaning against a fence. His chest tightened. A strange pressure filled his head, not pain, but something heavier, like a door being pushed from the inside. "This place," he whispered. "I've been here before." Tu Jiem's heart skipped. She said nothing. She had learned that love sometimes meant waiting, even when every part of her wanted to speak. Memories did not rush back all at once. They arrived in fragments. A feeling of holding someone's hand under the same sky, the warmth of shared laughter, a promise spoken without witnesses. He couldn't see her face in those memories, but he felt the emotion clearly, deep, steady, unshakable. He looked at Tu Diem, confusion and fear mixing with something new. "Why do I feel like I would protect you, even if I don't know you?" he asked. Tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled gently. "Maybe because love doesn't need permission from memory." That night, Toan sat alone, staring at his hands. For the first time, he wanted to remember, not because others expected him to, but because his heart was asking him to. Images flickered through his mind: a farm, a woman waiting, a life built slowly, patiently. The next morning, he spoke her name. "Tu Diem." She turned, breathless. "Yes?" "I don't remember everything," he said honestly, "but I know this. I don't want to lose you again." In that moment, she understood something profound. Love had not forced his memories to return. It had given them a place to come back to. Sometimes memories follow the heart home, and sometimes staying is the strongest kind of love.